The Author's Shelf.
The Author's Shelf.
The Author's Shelf. The Author's Shelf. It's about books and stuff.
Good afternoon, I'm Georgie Donaghy and welcome to another edition of The Author's Shelf. My guest today is children's author Wai Chim. She'll be chatting with me about her experiences in the writing industry. Sit back and relax as we bring you the stories beyond the page. Now it's time to welcome my guest for today. Wai was born in New York City. She taught English in Japan and became an author in Australia. That's the way to split it up, isn't it? Her journey to this point has been colourful, to say the least, and there's still a lot more to come from this young lady. I only met Wai yesterday at a Squibby event, and it was a wonderful event, and I heard her tell a story about her second book, which I'm going to get her to tell later on today because it was just a very surprise ending. It was lovely. Anyway, here to tell us more is children's author Wai Chim. Wai, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Georgie, and thanks for listening, everybody.
Now, you, as I said in my little intro to you, you certainly had an interesting life so far, or you have had an interesting life so far. Tell us, what is the Wai Chim story?
I'm surprised you think it's interesting. That's quite flattering.
Well, you were born, like, as I said, New York, and you taught in Japan, and you came to Australia, and now you're an author.
It's the millennial way, I guess. Millennial way. I grew up in New York, as you mentioned. My parents originally are from China, and they moved and got married in New York, and I was born in New York. And I grew up, they spoke Cantonese at home. And so I learned all my English through reading lots of books and going to school, and just fell in love with, I guess, reading stories. And yeah, after I left New York, I went to school in North Carolina, which is a sort of south of New York City. It's kind of in the middle there, and studied a whole bunch of things. I think I started out with computer science and then realized I didn't want to sit behind a computer for the rest of my life. So I moved on to English and economics and somehow fumbled my way through university. Didn't know what I wanted to do after I graduated, so decided to move to Japan, and I taught English there for about 18 months. I lived in a small town called Matsumoto, which is just south of Nagano, where if you love skiing, it's a great skiing spot. So definitely check that out if you're into that when you go to Japan. And yeah, I taught English to children there, as you mentioned, Georgie, for about 18 months. Lots of fun, really trying to, engage with young minds, even though, there's a little bit of a language barrier. And then in 2006, I moved to Australia and absolutely fell in love with it, and have been here ever since. And Sydney's such a wonderful place to be.
See, I said it was interesting.
I'm glad someone thinks so.
I think lots of people think it's interesting. And your time in Japan, you taught for about 18 months. How that experience obviously is helped shape you into, or had you already had aspirations of being an author?
I think I've always loved to write, and ever since I was an adolescent, I always wrote, and writing was just the way I expressed myself. I think that time in Japan definitely shaped my interest in kids. Specifically, I grew up as an only child, so I didn't have younger siblings or anything like that to engage with. So that process of, I guess, realizing how open young minds are, and being able to engage with kids, and how imaginative they are and how responsive they are to stories. I think that kind of did fuel a little bit of my interest in specifically writing kids' books, and finding some of my inspiration from my own childhood and my parents' childhood, which is what a lot of my writing is based on my culture, and seeing how well children respond to that. Because I think they just don't have some of those prejudices or some of those preconceived ideas. They're just open to anything. So I think it's such a great time to introduce new cultures and new ideas. So that's why I love writing kids' books.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. All right. Welcome back to the Author's Shelf. Wai, tell us about your first book, Chuk Chuk Mai's Secret Pets. How did that come about?
Sure. I started Chuk Chuk Mai's Secret Pets back in 2006, actually. I was completing a creative writing certificate at the University of Sydney. And while I was doing that, I started writing this manuscript for Chuk Chuk Mai's Secret Pets. The idea came to me, it's based on a nursery rhyme, a Cantonese nursery rhyme, which I've done a little bit of a translation in the actual text. But it's something that's probably quite familiar for some other Cantonese children. And it's just about someone twirling around in fields, and there's a pinwheel, and there's some chooks, and somehow all of that kind of came to me. I could turn this into a bit of a story. So I played around with the idea a little bit, and since I was completing this course at the University of Sydney, it was a great time to be writing this manuscript because I learned so much about character development. I learned so much about voice and how to really get into my characters' heads. So it was a great time for me to be writing this manuscript. And it took about 6 months for me to complete the first draft of it and do some editing. And I sent it around a little bit, and I had a small publisher really like it, but for various reasons couldn't produce it. So I stuck the manuscript actually in a drawer for a very long time. Started working full time and working in a magazine, working at a digital marketing agency, and thinking, oh, I'm writing commercially. That's writing. I've achieved my dream. But a part of me has always really wanted to create my own stories and get my own stories out there. So it was about 2011 where I saw a tweet from the Sydney Writers Center that said that they were looking for unsolicited children's manuscripts, that UQP was looking for the unsolicited manuscripts. So I thought, I have something. I'll send it in, see how it goes. And that was January 2011, and it was around October that same year, so 10 months later, where I finally got the call from my now publisher, Christina, who said, I absolutely love it and I'd like to put it forward to the publishing committee. And so that's like, more than 6 years or 5 years since I first started this book for it to finally come to fruition. And it was just such an incredible experience then.
That's quite short, actually. 5 years. That's
it is. I know.
Good.
I know. And it was one of those, like, I'd actually written a number of other manuscripts, aside from this one before that I kind of shopped around and got some rejections for and wasn't able to kind of get across. But it was a great learning and writing experience for me to develop myself as a writer. And it was just really lucky, I think, that this particular manuscript really kind of tugged at the right strings and was sent in at the right time. So I think I was really lucky in that regard.
So that's 10 months from when you sent it in.
Yep. And I had completely forgotten. I was like, oh yeah, sure. This has long been forgotten. Oh, it was also during that year of the floods, and UQP, of course, are based in Brisbane. So I was like, you know what they're going to do to block the floodwaters?
They're going to stick your manuscript
the slush pile
to block the water coming in.
That's what I thought was going to happen. So
10 months. It's a little bit of a Cinderella story.
It is definitely, and I always feel like I'm so incredibly lucky to have had that happen and everything. And everyone at UQP has just been so wonderful to me for that. And I'm just so incredibly grateful.
And in the dedication to your book, you credit your parents with reading nursery rhymes. How important was their influence on your early writing, or tell us about why you credit? What did they do? They told you nursery rhymes, obviously. So you tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, my parents, of course, don't speak English. They speak Cantonese, and as I was growing up, they really tried to instill in me a passion and an appreciation for the Chinese culture, whether I kind of wanted to or not. Quite frankly, as a child, I just wanted to eat pizza and macaroni and cheese, and they didn't
nursery
make
rhymes. No.
Yeah, no. But they did tell me traditional Cantonese nursery rhymes. They told me traditional stories, lots of stories that were about Chinese mythology and Chinese folk tales, and that really influenced. And even though I didn't appreciate it as much when I was a child, it really came to resonate with me when I was much older and realized that this is such a rich area to explore in terms of writing and story ideas. So, and my parents have just been amazingly supportive and wonderful. I'm an only child, so they've always been my family, and we're very close in that way, and they've been very supportive of what I want to do. So I really do owe everything that I've been able to achieve to them and all of their sacrifices that they've done to move to a different country and make sure I had an education and all these opportunities that aren't often afforded to children growing up in China. So I'm very grateful for them for that.
That's a really lovely story. Tell me, we're going to touch on this a bit later, but to give a little teaser out there, did you have a pet growing up? Because that comes up as part of your book we're about to talk about.
Sure. Well, growing up in New York, I certainly didn't have any exposure to chickens, but I did have a pet cat. Her name is Amy. She's an Abyssinian blue. She's absolutely gorgeous, and she knows it. So she's one of those princess cats and queen cats, and everywhere she goes, she has her little spots, and you can't sit in her spots. And my father will want to sit on the couch, but if the cat's there, he'll have to sit on a chair because she's taken up the entire couch. So I think that's really interesting how pets have such amazing personalities. And I think their interaction with humans is something that I connect really well to. And I know lots of kids do. And I still love animals to pieces and think they're such intelligent creatures. And chickens especially are brilliant animals, and what we can teach them, and, their interactions with people now and everything. So I think that that's such a great area to explore and what I write about.
I have a cat at home. I know exactly what you're talking about. Wai, as a writer, I'm sure you're familiar with the rejection letter. You did touch on it briefly before. Tell us all about your experience with the rejection letter.
Absolutely. Well, as you mentioned, as a writer, you have to be experienced with rejection. I wrote another manuscript before I ever started with Chuk Chuk, and it was about a little meerkat at the zoo. And I thought it was the most brilliant thing ever. And I thought it was just so funny, and I loved meerkats, and it was such a great idea. And I sent it around to quite a number of, different publishers and agents. And I expected them to love it and say, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be the next great, Harry Potter. No, not really, but part of me probably thought that. And of course, I got the rejection letters in. I got a few personal ones, which was really great. Love the concept.
That's excellent. Normally it's thanks, but no thanks, don't come again. And to get a personal note is an encouraging thing, I think.
Absolutely.
Even if they tell you you're horrible, it's encouraging.
Absolutely. And and I think it's also understanding that it was a learning process, and it was with the rejection letters of love the concept, love the idea, fell apart at the end. And that was actually really good for me, because I thought, I had this brilliant idea, but I just didn't finish it correctly. And that was a huge learning experience for me to understand, I kind of have to keep pushing my story through and make sure that all of the ends are tied together quite well. And, and I really thank that person who gave me that bit of feedback, because that was really valuable for me, as opposed to, and I did get a lot of form rejection letters as well of saying, no, sorry, not right. And, and even with Chuk Chuk, I did send it around, and I sent it around to a few, agencies in America as well, thinking, it's a little, different and a little bit unusual. And of course, I didn't think Chuk, no one in America is going to respond well to a book called Chuk Chuk. And, but with that, I think it was just all part of the process of understanding where I was going to go and what the possibilities were, and to be able to take all of those bits of rejection and bits of feedback and to shape it and continue to shape it and develop it until it became something even better. And that's sort of what's happened and how it finally got to the place where it got to today. So that was really great.
Are you a disciplined writer? Do you, with all that you've just told me and the rejection, and do you stick to a schedule and discipline, sit down for 2 hours every day, or?
I try to, I think is the best word for it. I definitely try to. I'm very lucky. Right now I'm spending most of my time writing in between some part-time work and freelance work. And I'm very lucky to be able to have those connections to do that. So I can spend a lot more time in my writing. But as disciplined as I try to be and have this sort of 9 to 5 schedule, it never works out the way you want it to. Your brain just isn't able to develop the ideas. You think, I'm going to write 1,000 words today. And you just get stuck on a problem. And I spend most of the day trying to figure out how to get myself out of that problem. And eventually it works, but it means that, the writing process, it just kind of it's its own beast, and it takes on its own, time schedule. And you try and coax it along and, stick to some kind of professionalism. There are deadlines. There are expectations to be met, but ultimately you have to kind of realize that it is its own beast, and you let it happen as it does.
Very, very, very true words there. I know you can't very well sit down and say, right, it's 9:00 now. Come on, inspiration. I need to
it just
start writing everything down right now. But I don't know. Do you find little tricks that you can kind of tease your brain into get going? I know if I'm sitting down and writing, I think, oh, okay, fine, right. Okay, I'm not inspired. Yeah, I've got, a basket of ironing over there and I need some washing done there. I need to do this. I need to do that. But I sit down and I start to read through it and then all of a sudden I get into it. And then I just keep going and going and then I go and do the washing and the ironing and
that's great. That's good that you can kind of prioritize that way. I think I'm really, I put blinkers on so I don't even see all the things that come in and I always feel bad because what have you been doing? I've been home all day and everything is a mess. Like I barely made the bed because I've just been sitting there staring at this computer and not really doing that much writing. The trick, I think one of the things I do is, and I actually got this trick from a mentor when I was doing that graduate certificate of creative writing, and it was John Scott, a local Australian author. He wrote Wara Wara, which we studied during that course, and he said you can always research your way out of a problem. And I think that has stuck with me, and that's kind of where I get to. If I find myself stuck somewhere, I go to the computer and do research and Google image search and blog search and try and read other stories that are around my problem and try and find ways to get around them that way. And it saved me a number of times through my writing to be able to research and find new ideas and examples of things. And it can just be something really small, but it can spark that little thing that you needed to keep going.
So Google's your best friend too.
Google, I don't know how writers did anything before there was Google.
I often wonder the same thing because I'm on Google all the time.
Absolutely.
And I have numerous windows open with looking up this thing and that thing and yeah.
It's incredible. And it's really funny. You learn to search in a certain way. So I know working in digital marketing that Google tracks everything you search and they must be appalled at some of the things that I'm writing, like chicken coop, dirty, clean, and just these keywords strung together trying to fix this problem. And yeah, it's quite interesting thinking about that.
Very interesting. Let's just hope Google don't start sending us things like Facebook of areas of interest that we're looking into because, as you said, it might be a little bit scary. Okay, the inspiration for your characters, so Chook Chook. Where did May come from?
Yep. It's funny because I think writers get this a lot. Oh, is your character based on anyone in particular? And I think the answer, and it's a little bit of a disappointing answer, it's a mishmash of people and personalities and traits from people I think May is a combination of myself, probably, and my mother, kind of combined. If I had to sort of put people in that, she's very independent. She's very a little headstrong, and she's quite, she knows what she wants, and she finds all these sort of clever ways to get what she wants. I think Guo, the older brother, is probably closest to my father, if I had to do that. And he's just very practical and very loving and very disciplined and looking after his little sister. And I think that's sort of how I view my father and our relationship. So I think maybe that quite is an influence. But then again, there are so many traits and differences that, you couldn't identify with any person, and it just kind of worked themselves in there. And these characters take on their own personalities and they become their own people so that and at the end, they're completely different from anyone you've ever known before.
But taking from your life experiences.
I think so. Yeah, and it's just those interactions. I mean, I've, seen people on the train dressed in a certain way and be like, oh, that would be the perfect look for a character, and try and do that. And I'll editorialize an entire story about this poor person on the train, doesn't know that I'm sitting there going, okay, and this is what their life is probably going to be like. And the reason that they got out in the morning and put those clothes on is because of this. And, and you postulate a bunch of scenarios around there, and that could possibly get worked in later on for something or get scrapped.
That's really scary because I do the same thing. I look at people, what they're wearing. So be careful what you're wearing on the train, people, because there are writers out there who are writing down what you look like in the morning. And they're fantasizing about your life.
Absolutely.
Yes. So, okay, no grungy slippers and brush your hair and things like that.
Although, with that being said, you could be an inspiration for an incredible character. So, maybe you want to be that person and be inspiring people. Well, J.K. Rowling wrote the Harry Potter series on the train, on the long train trip. So, I only wonder what was walking around her carriage at the time. Anyway, on that note, we'll be back in just a second. We're back with Wai Chim on the Author's Shelf. Wai, what is the most rewarding thing about being a children's author for you? I love being a children's author because I think there's just so much potential in kids and being able to communicate stories that are so meaningful but so simple and just address some of the most important things in life. I talk a lot about kindness because I really do believe that kindness will get you very far in the world, and that's hopefully how I live my life. But also but other things like just observing the world. I think being able to look at a world through a kid's eyes is a great way to see things again, rather than all the complications that sometimes we deal with on a day in, day out, reading the news and seeing the headlines, bringing it back down to sort of, when things were simpler and easier to understand. And of course, being a kid's author, the great thing is being able to interact with kids and being able to see their faces and see how they think and communicate and the ideas that they have. And it's always fascinating and wonderful to be able to talk to kids about what they think about stories and what kind of stories they're drawn to and the ideas that they have for what they want to do with their lives. And it's just so incredible and inspiring because it's just limitless, their imaginations.
All right, I'm going to invite you now to read a little bit from Chuk Chuk, May's Secret Pets. Here is Wai reading Chuk Chuk, May's Secret Pets.
Thank you, Georgie. This is just a little scene right after May finds the chooks. I watched the chicks as they played in the grass, cheeping and peeping loudly. They were so small they couldn't have been more than a few days old. I wondered where their mother was. I stood up and looked around. The young shoots of our rice crop bobbed softly in the light spring breeze, waving hello to the distant mountains. But there were no chickens in the field. Our farmhouse, with its bright red tile roof at the top of the hill and our storage shed at the bottom, were the only buildings to be seen. How did these baby chickens get here? Sss. Suddenly, both chicks stopped squawking and huddled together very still. Not a peep. I pricked up my ears and listened for it again. Sss, sss, sss. The hiss was getting louder, and I could hear a soft rustle in the grass. I craned my neck to look around, and then I saw it. A small green snake was weaving its way through the blossoms towards me and the chicks. I didn't like snakes at all. I knew from the patterns on its body that this snake wasn't poisonous, and there wasn't anything really to fear. But I also knew that snakes loved to snack on small animals like mice, birds, and of course, baby chickens. Slowly and carefully, trying not to make any sudden movements, I crouched down in the grass. The snake was still weaving this way and that, closing in on the chicks. A frightened cheep escaped the littler one, and it nestled closer to the other. I very gently picked them up and placed them into the lap of my dress. Holding out the edge of the fabric to make a nest, I stood up with the chicks and began to back away. The snake lifted its head. It flicked its tongue out a few times, a greedy look in its eyes. The chicks were squawking now, and I had to hold my dress up so they wouldn't leap out. I took a few steps to the left and back, to the right and back, zigzagging my way across the field, keeping an eye on the hungry snake as it slithered closer. All of a sudden, the snake stopped in its tracks. I, too, came to a standstill, and the chick stopped peeping. I held my breath and waited. Boom!
Excellent. Very exciting. That was lovely. Thank you very, very much for reading.
I'll also say that that's actually based on an experience my mother had when she was growing up, and her littlest sister was getting chased by a snake. And she was saying it was so intelligent. Her sister was about 2 years old in a little field, and a snake was chasing her, and she was running in a zigzag pattern. So it was harder for the snake to catch her. And that was one of those inspirational stories that she told me that I
something that stayed with you. You adopted into the book.
I'm glad I didn't have snakes growing up at that age.
No, same here. Little and Low is book 2 in the series. Tell us a little bit about Little and Low.
Sure. Little and Low in the City is the follow-on to Chuk Chuk May's Secret Pets. In this edition, May's going through some changes and her family's going through some changes, and May's having a hard time adapting. So she decides to take a journey into the city, and she takes her chickens with her, which is always going to lead to lots of fun things and hijinks. One of the inspirations for Little and Low, and I know Georgie heard it yesterday and she wanted me to bring it up a little bit here because it's a lovely little story. One of the inspirations for Little and Low is about my own personal experience with chickens. As I mentioned, I grew up in New York, and chickens aren't something that I'm particularly familiar with. but I did have one encounter with some chickens, which is at an arcade near my school. They had some tic-tac-toe playing chickens. So what they had done was they had trained these chickens to play noughts and crosses, as you call them in Australia. But they had trained them to play tic-tac-toe in this little box. Now, the thing is, as fun as that is, it's not a particularly great life for a chicken. You know, you can imagine chickens living in a box playing tic-tac-toe with silly humans every day. It's probably not the best life or experience. You're not running around in pastures. You don't have other chicken friends. So what happened was a lot of people came into this arcade and they demanded that the owner, let the chicken go, or that they were going to threaten to report him to the RSPCA. And they were just very angry all the time about, how cruel he was being to this animal. But of course, the owner just kind of ignored them or chased them out of the store, as you do if people are complaining about how you run your business. You tend not to be so forthcoming about that. Until one day, this woman, I'm calling her Diana. I actually don't know what her name is, and I've researched this a bit, and I couldn't find out what her name is, so I've always called her Diana. She comes into the arcade and she sees the chicken in the box, and she immediately falls in love with the chicken and says to the owner, "Excuse me, sir, I absolutely love this chicken, and would it be possible for me to take it home with me? And if I could purchase it from you?" And the owner says, "No, sorry, she's not for sale." But Diana said, "Please, sir, please. I have an aunt. She lives upstate, and she has a beautiful farm. And if you let me take the chicken with me, she'll have such a great life there. If you'll just let me take her home with me." And the owner says, "Oh, I'll think about it. Come back next week." But Diana persisted, and she said, "No, please, I can't wait that long. If you could please let me take her home with me, I promise she'll have the best life." Owner says, "Oh, I'll think about it. Let me sleep on it. Come back tomorrow." And Diana persisted. She said, "No, it can't be tomorrow. It has to be today. Please, sir, if you'll let me take her home today." Finally, the owner looks at her, looks at the chicken, and says, "All right, you can take her." So Diana jumps up with joy, and she hugs the owner, and she gets to take the chicken home. She takes the chicken home first to her little apartment in New York. Chicken's still pecking at the walls because it thinks it has to play noughts and crosses to get some food before it realized, oh, I don't have to do that anymore. So finally, Diana sends the chicken upstate to live with her aunt, and she takes some photos and she sends them to the owner, and she says, "The owner, thank you so much for letting me take this chicken home with me. It has a great life now, but I've always wondered, why did you give her to me? Why did you let me take her?" And the owner said very simply, "It's because you asked so nicely." I love that story, and that's sort of one of the inspirations for me about writing Little and Low in the City, is that kindness can take you so far. And one of the things that I hope that my stories will instill in our readers.
That is, I love that. That's such a beautiful little story. And I couldn't find that on the internet when I was researching you, so you should put that out there somewhere.
I should. I'll put a link up to it and the original story about it and everything. And it is such an inspirational story. And it is, and you can still go to New York and you can still see the big sign. It says World Famous Tic-Tac-Toe Chickens. It's on Mott Street in New York, in Chinatown. Look it up for you folks. It's worth a visit.
As I said, lovely little story. You are listening to The Author's Shelf on 2SSR 99.7 FM. We love receiving your feedback. If you would like to suggest an author or a segment that you'd like us to cover from the writing industry, please email me, georgie@theauthorshelf.com.au. Also, if you're an emerging author, children's author, and are looking for somewhere to display your work, why not visit creativekidstales.com.au? There you'll find a complete publisher's listing, competition information, writing tips, and a whole lot more. It's a great site to assist you on your journey to publication. I'm joined this afternoon by Wai Chim. Wai, what's next for you?
Well, next I'm working on the final conclusion of Chuk Chuk, and it's going to be book 3, and it will be due out in July of next year, tentatively. You know how sometimes scheduling goes around, but it will be the conclusion, and it's going to be a biggie. So I hope you guys will enjoy it.
Definitely look forward to that one. That's about all from us this afternoon. It's gone really quickly. Thank you very much, Wai, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I hope everyone listening out there at home has enjoyed another edition of The Author's Shelf. We'll see you next time.